my good sis Mari.
Hello, Mel.
Good to see you again on another episode of Got Melanin, our 6th episode already. Jesus.
Coming to you live from my parents' house in Chicago. Great aesthetic change that we're giving the people today if you're watching us on YouTube. But yeah, episode 6. Goodness me. This feels deep breaths. Deep breaths.
Deep breaths, especially because I feel like a lot of what we've been talking about recently has been so legal heavy. And like, God bless, do you know what I mean? Thank you times a trillion to Miss Netta for helping us out with the last 2 episodes about immigration or crimmigration. But yeah, I am 6 already. I haven't seen the time go by.
That's what I feel like. I feel like I was looking back on our last episode as we started to go into this one, is, you know, you and I talked about where are we now in the Black Lives Matter movement. We had our first conversation, I believe 2 months ago, maybe a little bit over 2 months ago, when things were in the heat of the moment. And now we're circling back and so many things have happened, yet I feel like no time has passed.
Yeah.
So, yes, speaking of things that have happened, I would be remiss if I didn't start this episode the same way we start every single episode. We are now at 150 plus days asking for, you know, some type of redress and justice for Breonna Taylor. 150 days.
That's absurd. That's fully absurd. It's like, I was about to say something stupid, like that's half a year. It's not fully half a year, but like we're not too far off.
No. And it's one of those things where I'm so happy that you and I have had conversations about other cases such as Elijah McClain, where there now is starting to be things like his family suing the city of Aurora. And, you know, you're having conversations about that. You saw the mentions in John Lewis's farewell op-ed. You know, you're seeing balls rolling on the Ahmaud Arbery case, on the George Floyd case. But we are still here 150 days out, and we're simply asking for somebody to think about convening a grand jury to prosecute the people that have killed Breonna Taylor.
Yeah. And how has that still not been? It's a question of like, I mean, it doesn't, as Black women ourselves, it's just quite like, oh, I guess it doesn't really matter if I ever get shot in my sleep and then left to die regardless, like, of whether or not I was killed immediately when I was shot in my sleep. But yeah, apparently we don't matter. Like,
it's incredibly disheartening. And I think, as you said, like, as Black women, I think that's what makes it so disheartening, is because you feel like you're now continually being told by looking at the story of someone who could have been you, that her life didn't matter. And I think that, again, we talk about this all the time. You and I are here using our platform to have conversations between friends, right? And we would be utterly not doing justice to others that look like us if we didn't continue to put voice to power on things that are affecting women who look like us.
For sure.
Speaking of women who look like us, who are doing things in the world, here, you know, since I've been in the United States for the past, I don't know, a week or so with my family, we saw Senator Kamala Harris. Let me make sure I put senator on that woman's name.
Put respect on her name.
In a lot of news outlets, people are forgetting to give her her title. We're very quick to say President Trump, Vice President Pence, former VP Joe Biden, and we're out here calling her Kamala.
Oh, Lord Jesus, no.
So that's a conversation in itself that we're not even gonna we're gonna leave that. But the reason that I brought her up is, as you mentioned, Mel, in the past 2 episodes, we've been taking the time to talk about immigration and the effects of immigration on Black and brown people specifically. And I believe it was last episode, we briefly touched on Rep. Ilhan Omar and how people were telling her to go back to her country, et cetera, i.e. those people being President Trump, who in a tweet in 2019 told Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and Rep. Ilhan Omar that they could go back to the totally broken countries from which they came mind you, 4 out of 5 of those women are born and raised in the United States of America. Rep. Ilhan Omar came over here as a child.
Yeah.
But as we're talking about racist rhetoric and who gets to be a citizen and who gets to be a person centralized in the United States of America, we are back singing our old tune of birtherism in response to Senator Harris. For those who are new to this conversation or don't know what birtherism is, let me just take 5 seconds to let you know. Birtherism first came up when President Obama was running for office in 2008, and Trump said that his birth certificate was fake. There are literally quotes of him being on TV saying he doesn't have a birth certificate because he was convinced he was raised in Kenya rather than Hawaii.
Yeah.
Let that sink in.
People are trying to figure out why isn't he giving his birth certificate. It's not a birth certificate. A certificate of live birth, and you can see that one that you have and the one that I brought you, because that's the one that's on the internet and all over the place. It doesn't even have a serial number. It doesn't have a signature. It doesn't have a signature. One that I saw on television has a stamp, but that's not a signature.
Right, but that's how they
Excuse me, but that's not the one that they were showing to everybody. And I just say very simply, why doesn't he show his birth certificate? Why has he spent over $2 million in legal fees to keep this quiet and to keep this silent? When I listened today to the tape of the grandmother, and she was saying he was born essentially in Kenya, and then all of a sudden, don't forget, this is when Barack Obama was hot as a pistol because it looked like he was going to get the nomination, and they had a lot of people, a lot of handlers in there, and all of a sudden you hear people all over the room, no, he was born in Hawaii, he was born in Hawaii. But she didn't say that.
It was a misinterpretation.
They drowned her out. She was like, there were a lot of people in that room, and she said Kenya, he was born right here, and then they started saying, screaming, no, you mean Hawaii, you mean Hawaii. There's a lot of crazy things. Look, I don't like to talk about this issue too much because I really would rather talk about China. I would really rather talk about what OPEC is doing to destroy us. I would really rather talk about other things. But I'll be honest with you. I started this, and I heard the question for the first time 4 weeks ago. And I assumed, although I had heard about it for years, I assumed that he was born in the United States, meaning in Hawaii. I assumed that. The more I go into it, the more suspect it is.
We are now sitting here in 2020 with our lovely Senator Harris about to be, hopefully our next VP. And she is half Indian, half Jamaican, first gen, from Oakland, California. My good sis was born in Oakland, California. But Trump most recently said he heard that her birth certificate does not meet the requirement.
Oh my God. What requirements is he talking about? Actually though, like what are these requirements? Like it reminds me of those videos, like I think it was Trevor Noah's show, right? And then they like sent out this journalist to go and like interview people at Trump rallies, and it was about Obama's birth certificate. And then this one woman, Trump supporter, was like, well, I need to know that there were witnesses to the birth. Do you know what I mean? Like I need to know that like there were attendants and stuff. And I'm like, that's the whole point of a birth certificate, is it not? Is that not your testimony of this person being born in this place at this time in this, like, oh, Jesus.
If there was maybe witnesses that were attendants at his birth.
Like his mother? Would you listen to his mother?
No. She has motivation to lie.
So you don't trust Donald Trump's birth certificate either?
Yeah, because he's been here forever.
Well, how do you know? But what's your proof?
Well, his parents and...
But no, but they're biased. I'm talking about like people who could be in the room.
Why would they be biased?
Well, like, I'm just using your logic against you.
Okay.
Outside of having no proof, what proof do you have?
I don't have any.
You don't have any proof?
My opinion.
Your opinion. And what's your source?
Just Facebook or Twitter. I mean, everything. And
So you'll look at like facts and bull. You'll put it all together.
Exactly.
Obama is a Muslim. He's a terrorist. Nobody will ever tell me different. Do I have proof? No. Do I have articles? No.
But your mind is made up without any information.
My mind is made up.
That's how I feel. Huh. Come on now. And so, yes, we are back in this framework as we are stepping into this November election, you know, in this racist rhetoric surrounding this Black woman. Now, you and I will sit here and we know this woman is not perfect by any means. There are things that I know both you and I have disagreed with in her past prosecutorial record, and that's fine. But I recognize that this is a life and death situation, period.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know that her race is not a reason to disqualify her from this position.
No, like, unless she's not an American citizen.
Which we know for a fact she is.
Yeah, like, or else she wouldn't have had the positions that she does. Like, I don't understand. So I'm gooped. I'm sorry. So, like, you're telling me that, like, there's a whole conspiracy that has just let Senator Kamala Harris make her way up the ladder of, like, government, and that no one has ever once checked to see that, like, she is. Yo, no, that is such a, see, to me, okay, and that might just be because it's to me, because, like, I'm not the person that's under fire, but, like, to me, that's more of a what's it called, of, like, an insult to those who would have, like, vetted her and, like not pushed her forward, but, like, would have been like, yes, this is your senator, like, this is the person that needs to be your like, all of these different people. So you're saying that they were dumb enough not to check if she was bruh, really? Like, really?
Ma'am. We are lucky because Senator Harris has continually come out, and she was speaking to the Griot, and she said, you know, I know that these people are going to come with everything they can. And effectively, she said, you better believe I'm ready.
Yeah.
And we know what we're walking into. And that's kind of where we get to this point when you and I are having this conversation about where are we now? Because so much of this movement, and even talking about Senator Harris, there's been so much conversation around, is she a Black woman because she's half South Asian? You know, why do we consider her a Black woman? Is it because she went to an HBCU? Is it because she's in a Divine Nine? Like, what, you know, what qualities are defining her Blackness? Because she's not, can she be African American? Can she be Black? All of these things, right? And you and I have learned one thing from being Black women living both in the UK and the US, the semantics of what people call you runs the gamut. And I think today you and I wanted to hit the nit-grit and say, Black is not a bad word.
No, it's okay.
Period. Like, if you missed it, run the tape back, run the YouTube back, do what you need to do. But Black is not a bad word.
No.
And that's what we're talking about today. We're going to look at BAME. All of our US listeners are going to find out what BAME is. You and I are going to try and dissect what this new term BIPOC is. I've been calling it BIPOC, but I could totally be making that up. It could really just be BIPOC.
But, like, same though, because I don't know, it just reads also fairly easily, which, like, I can't help but not assume that it's BIPOC, like, the way that you can't just not assume that it's BAME. And it even used to be BME. They've now added the A, like.
So why don't we start there? Why don't you, for people who are not me, why don't you tell us what is BAME or BAME, however we are pronouncing this?
Okay, rolling up.
Rolls up sleeves, gets ready.
We're getting into it. So I'll start with, like, a little anecdote because I have, like, a story about this. So I was asked by, like, this network that I've worked with at my other job at Education, and they're called the Young Creative Leaders Network. And basically it is a really awesome network of kids from all different backgrounds and, like, trades and stuff that basically get together to promote each other's leadership skills. So I get asked to go with the founder, Eddie, to Lancaster University, which is, like, an hour north from Manchester, to help facilitate this, like, talk, workshop, sitch on, like, what does BAME mean? Like, do we like it? Do we not like it? All this stuff. I don't like it. That is my personal preference. I'm gonna say it now. I am not BAME. I'm mixed French Congolese. If you don't have the time to recognize that, like, that's who I am, then you just don't have the time to recognize me. And frankly, I just don't want that in my life. Plain and simple. And so there was like, you know, it was a room full of definitely mixed kids, like all sorts of heritages, which was awesome because, yeah, you know, it's good to see. And the conversation, everyone understood that baseline, it's discriminatory, that like regrouping everyone that's basically not white. And actually, you know, those who are included in, sorry. I'm like getting sidetracked because my brain is ready to go. But like, essentially it regroups like anyone who's like non-white ethnicity into this group.
Okay.
And people have understood that like, well, not even people, but like this group of kids also agreed that like this was discriminatory in itself. However, the doors that it has opened for people who would, you know, be considered as part of the BAME community,
right,
have been huge. So, you know, you have now more Black and brown artists that get to feature their work because of BAME quotas or like BAME related commissions. It does open a door. And one of the girls that was there had said that it was positive discrimination. And I despise that. I don't despise her.
I don't know what that means. I've never heard of anything that would positive discrimination.
Yeah. So I don't
elaborate.
It's not, I again, to make it clear, like I've got nothing against this young woman. She was really lovely, really great, and very bright. And her point was to say that like, although it's discriminatory in itself, it does offer that path for more inclusion. And thus, like, it's almost like, you know how people have been saying that, for instance, with like Biden Harris, you might not be into them, but it's one, better than the current status quo. Right. And two, it will offer, hopefully, like more opportunities down the line for like real positive representation rather than just this like political jargon of like, oh yes, I'm for the people, when in reality, like, you're one of the perpetrators of like why these people are suffering the way that they suffer. So I'm like, okay, yes, positive discrimination, but no, it's like, I do not agree with that at all, because at this point, it's still discrimination. When you see newspaper headlines that discuss, you know, oh, the BAME community faces like more problems with COVID, and then they use photos of like Black men and women to illustrate the BAME community, you're literally alienating like a huge part of people who would technically fall in that, under that banner and in that community. Like East Asians, for example, during like at the start of COVID here, so I'm talking like Chinese, Japanese, like East Asians, they faced a lot of discrimination and a lot of racism on the street for being like the reasons as to why the virus was in the UK and stuff. But I did not see a single headline that was saying like BAME community faces discrimination as they are held responsible for like COVID-19 waves in the UK. Like, why is it always used to represent this darker side of who constitutes the community rather than actually realizing that like, okay, we're making this huge space, but at the end of the day, like, are we actually just trying to like, you know, almost like political wash the problem of like, do you know what I mean? Like it's not.
Well, my question then becomes and this is always, and I am like you, I am not pro BAME, to be honest with you, because for that exact reason, if you are specifically referencing Black people in the UK, call them what they are. They are Black people in the United Kingdom. Reference that. If you are speaking about East Asians, speak about East Asians, right? There's absolutely no reason for you to lump everybody together as if their experiences are a monolith, because they're not. But I say all this to say I'm not particularly shocked that this is what has happened with the BAME, which I don't remember if we said this, but it's Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, correct? Yeah. And it's not shocking to me that the UK has adapted this understanding of how we group cultures together, because in 1796, the first instance of people of color being used was in the Oxford English Dictionary. Like, it is literally, yes, exactly. It is literally their term. It is a term that was coined by the English to describe all non-white people.
Yeah. And the thing also is that like, even the term BAME in itself, it actually doesn't even take into account like white ethnic minorities, believe it or not, because you've got like, so I guess the appropriate term, I hate being like this, but like it's a PC world, isn't it? So like
this is a PC show, but yeah.
Yeah. Ta-da. So you've got like travelers, so like kind of like Gypsy Roma who have Irish heritage, who aren't really considered as a part of BAME, but they're like a marginalized minority ethnic group.
But this is
It's just a thought though. I'm happy to be fought on this in a very polite discourse, but like I'm just saying like that is something to consider. You know, Black and Asian minority ethnics. So are you consider, like, do you know what I mean? Are you going to consider those people as part of that? Or are you just going to say, oh, well, they've got Irish heritage. Like, technically they're Irish. Like that poses a lot of, it sets a lot of like precedent and places for it. And actually what blows my mind is that even conservatives, some conservatives find the term as like wholly inadequate. Like wholly inadequate. That was the quotation. And so it's like, so you guys partly agree that like this is inappropriate, probably because a lot of BAME conservatives don't feel like they fit in the BAME banner, under the BAME banner, the way you and I don't feel like we fit under it, because we're our individual selves. We're not like, you know, a piece of
I'm
like
just a proponent, you know me, I'm just a proponent, call it what it is. If you are talking about Black people, talk about Black people, period.
Yeah, no, exactly. But then what does Boris Johnson do when when BLM protests reach like whole new heights in the UK? He calls for like, okay, you know what? I'm going to start a commission to look into these racial inequalities and everything. And obviously the first person that he puts in charge of it is Munira Mirza, who's like a number 10 advisor. Being a number 10 advisor means that you're like creme de la creme elite policy advisor. Like you're talking directly with the prime minister.
And what
like,
ethnicity is this person, Melina?
She's South Asian.
And we're having a conversation about let me just be clear. We're having a conversation about Black Lives Matter, period. And the number one policy advisor in the United Kingdom is a South Asian woman.
The commission is not for Black Lives Matter. It's Black Lives Matter that has prompted for Johnson to like announce that this commission was going to be set up and stuff. So she chairs the whole commission, right? And she has said before that like previous inquiries like this one, because this has happened in the past, trust, like multiple times in the past. I think I mentioned this like 2 episodes ago anyway, but she has says that like previous inquiries have perpetuated a culture of grievance. And she actually like was saying that there was an audit of racial inequalities back from 2017 in public services that she thought was, you know, anti-racism is becoming weaponized across the political spectrum. If you believe that anti-racism efforts are being weaponized, so I don't know, do you feel this weapon is pointed against you? Could you be potentially perpetrating things that anti-racism activists and campaigners would say are racist? Like, is it because you're feeling the actual...
Do you feel attacked, honey? Are we striking a nerve?
I'm sorry if I stroke a nerve, but here we are, like, plink, here we are. I don't care anymore. And like, she has appointed this guy called Tony Sewell, I'm not sure, but he's the newly appointed chair of Government Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, which is a part of this whole new commission.
Ooh, that's a name.
Huh?
That is a name.
I know. It's nice when you got a long, fancy name attached to what you're chairing. Mm-hmm. So he's made homophobic comments in the past, like in general, and he's come out and said like, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. But still, in 2010, he was saying that he's not convinced by the idea that teachers had low expectations of Black boys, and rather that they, he said, and I quote, "I believe Black underachievement is due to the low expectations of school leaders who do not want to be seen as racist and who position Black boys as victims." So he's saying that like even the teachers victimize their Black students because they don't want to be seen as like racists for giving them lower grades, when like these Black boys should technically, like, if they're not working hard, if they're underachieving, then that's just what that is. And it's like, sir,
it's not a flaw in the education system with access to school, to safe schools. It's specifically due to race.
We saw literally this week in the UK, all of these kids finishing high school, getting their exam results back, and their exam results, if they went to like I know they're not called public schools here, but like basically state schools.
Right.
That if you were at a state school and it has a record of like performing badly, your grades were insanely dropped. Like some kids went from like 2 A's and a B to like 3 C's and whatever. Like it's just madness, absolute madness. And in that context, like again, you want to say that it's like, oh no, teachers are scared of being labeled racist, so that's why they like don't get. No, it is literally a problem within the educational system. Like these schools, these state schools that would be in postcodes that like are known for having gang violence, for example, or underserved, like underprivileged, are the same. Do you know, like the algorithm works in a way that like would, what's the opposite of favor? I guess neglect these schools with their results. Yeah. And then private schools, on the other hand, where like you pay to attend a lot of money, have done really well, which is really shocking and surprising. And at this point, it's not even a question of like, I mean, it's fully a question of race, but then in comes the question of class as well. And this is a massive issue in this country, in the UK, is that like people refuse to see that there is like a class issue that goes hand in hand with like a racism issue that ultimately is the reason why you have like all these, oh my gosh, racists and like this violence and blah, 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 because no one's trying to address the actual root of the problem. And it just, you just can't do that. Like, I'm so mad. I was fuming. I was just like, this is unbelievable. And even apparently like I did the International Baccalaureate in high school. And I heard from one of my old like classmates that apparently IB schools have also had the same algorithm problem, where like some schools have had their grades go down drastically because like historically as a school they've not done well on the IB, not taking into account the students' individualities. What these race commissions do now is literally do the same by putting people under this BAME banner. It's not looking at individualities. It's not looking at like the reasons for not even people's actions, but like the reasons for them being in this situation that they are. By regrouping everyone like this, you're literally removing a sense of freedom of individuality to these people. Like,
no, and that's the whole point, right? The reason that we're having this episode, and the reason that we're calling into question BAME specifically and its proximity to the Black Lives Matter movement, is because we are seeing systemically throughout Britain the effects on Black people specifically. Who are being disenfranchised, whether that be in the education system, whether that be the discrimination in the news media, whether that be the constant prosecution in the judiciary, because we know that, well, maybe not everybody knows, but in the UK, the largest population of people that are incarcerated are Black people, right? But then anytime we want to address these race issues, or we want to address issues of minorities that are continually being disenfranchised, we are not calling it what it is. We are putting it under this header and we are saying, this is a BAME issue. Well, it's not a BAME issue. When you've actively said that you are specifically talking about Black people, when we are specifically talking about people that are dying, we are specifically talking about people that are being brutalized by the police, et cetera, disenfranchised in the educational system. No, you're talking about Black people, right? You putting it in the context of a myriad of other people does not make it prettier, does not make it more okay. If anything, it says we care less, because when we statistically look at this, you will find that other groups are doing better, so it must be a them problem, right? It's the same way that you and I have talked about in hiring processes for BAME. When we think about who gets access to jobs, BAME hires are not going to Black people, right? You and I have talked about how the highest unemployment rate, which is the same as in the United States of America, is Black people. But you are focusing them in an umbrella and you are saying, oh, we've got diverse populations, we've got diverse groups, we've got a ton of BAME hires. Well, you've got very specific diversity and you're using that as a catch-all. It's the same way that in the response to the Black Lives Matter movement, we didn't create a Black commission. We didn't try and figure out what is happening to Black people in the UK. We said, what's happening to everybody? And I think that's where people are getting frustrated, right? That's where this movement is really beginning to hit a head. And that takes me into the conversation specifically about why I personally am not really a huge fan of BIPOC, right? So BIPOC in itself, or BIPOC, I feel like I am just butchering whatever it's supposed to be. And I apologize.
If it's supposed to represent you at this point, like, you can say it however you want. If you're technically falling under this category, it's yours to say however you want.
Whew.
I said
but
that.
Yes, we said that. But we all know, right? Black people in America have gone through a myriad of different names that we have been referred to. That is not something that we even have to really dissect, whether we're talking about Negro to colored to words that I will not reference on this podcast because I do not give them power, to African American to Black. You know, we know that these terms have been cyclical, right? So in 1904, I believe it was Fannie Williams she wrote a piece that was like, do we need another name? And the whole idea was she wanted to move away from Black people being called Negro because she felt like it was in reference to slavery and wanted to relinquish that piece of who Black people were. In contrast, in the same time period, you have W.E.B. Du Bois, who was like, no, we should be reclaiming Negro because we should take our power back, right? So then we continue the conversation and, you know, obviously we know in civil rights, Jim Crow, in that era, we saw the term colored used, kind of like we saw Negro used too. We kind of saw a little jabber of both. And as we went into the Black Power movement, we saw Black people take back the term Black and said, no, like, we are Black people. But in contrast, as we started to push into, I want to say like the 70s-ish, we had people like Reverend Jesse Jackson who were pushing for a rainbow coalition, who straight up was saying, you know, you're paying attention to the Italian Americans, you're paying attention to the Irish Americans. What about the African Americans, right? The people like Black, he recently said, Black is a color, but we built this country through the African slave trade. African American acknowledges that. Any term that emphasizes the color and not the heritage separates us from our heritage. And that's something that he said recently. And, you know, I recognize that for previous leaders, such as Reverend Jesse Jackson, who I know both of us on this show, me as a loyal Chicagoan and just as a Black woman in general, are so grateful for all that you have done for the Black community in America. But when I think about myself and even conversations that I've had with my parents and my brother over the past week that I've been here, if somebody's gonna ask me, what am I? I'm Black, period. Full stop. Blackity black, call it what it is, Black. Like, it's a powerful term. It's inclusionary. It's all encompassing. It recognizes that although we know race may be a social construct, the culture that is created around Blackness is very real and it needs to be acknowledged, period.
I have a question.
Talk to me, ma'am.
And this is a personal one, so like, please feel free to tell me like you don't want to answer it. But like,
I feel like our listeners are earning me as a human, so.
Just, yeah. I mean, obviously, yeah, again, if anyone asks you, you just said you're Black, and that's what that is, period, point blank, done. But in the case of what he was saying of like recognizing your heritage, which I also think is like a big just, what's the word? It's a massive statement to, again, recruit people that like, no, I actually might be like Haitian and like my family might have actually just like emigrated in 1905 and like was not slave trade like brought up on, you know what I mean? But, and you know, is that actually genuinely something that like you don't necessarily identify with, or is that just that it's like a heritage that like for you, like it's not even that like it's something that you wouldn't know, but your roots,
I get what you're asking, right? This is actually like the PC debate when people talk about Black versus African American, right? So myself personally, I know I'm of the African diaspora. I know you stole my people from West Africa and then you carved up the country and decided whose lines for what and who belonged to which colonizer. I'm very clear on that. My Blackness came from the continent of Africa. There's zero questions to me about that. Like, None. So for me, if you interchangeably called me African American versus Black, I'm not going to get offended because I recognize that my Blackness is rooted in origins in Africa. There's no question about that. But I also recognize that African American is a kind of PC thing that people tend to say, especially in the American context, because they're afraid of saying the term Black, period. And they feel like they're not being culturally and politically correct. And to the point that you actually just made, that is why there's such a debate, right? Because in the 1960s, there was a large immigrant population that came over from the rest of the diaspora. So whether we're talking about the Caribbean, whether we're talking about the Latinx community, or even actual immigrants from the continent of Africa, not everyone then, like if I'm Jamaican and born in the US, or Jamaican and immigrated to the United States, there's a potential that you are not going to see yourself as African American, right? You are going to affiliate and identify yourself with said country of the diaspora. And that's why, and especially in the American context, Blackness is a culture, right? So we may understand that race is a social construct. There's absolutely no question about that. It's a biological, we've had that conversation. But the implications of being Black, the lived experience of being Black in the capital W West, that's a real thing. That is a culture that has been created out of hardship. That is a culture that has been created out of resilience. And that needs to be acknowledged, that is a group of people that are specifically tied to something. We are tied to a joint narrative. So when I think about Black people in America, we are tied to a narrative, whether that be your ancestors had to go through chattel slavery, whether that be your family immigrated here and then you got lumped into what it meant to be Black and in America. But Blackness as a culture, as a space, as a group needs to be acknowledged as such. And I think that, so as we're entering, right, so you and I have talked about all these like lumpy groups that people are tossing people into. So people originally were like, POC, that doesn't give enough of the acknowledgement to the experiences that people of color have different experiences, right? So when we say POC, whether we be talking about in the UK context or the US context, we're literally just talking about non-white folks, period. Like, we're just saying anyone that's not white is a person of color. Well, the Black experience in America versus the East Asian experience in America versus the Latinx experience in America, they're all versus the Indigenous experience in America, they're all very different experiences. And the decision to lump them all under one blanket term was causing some people problems. And so that's where we got to BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Those are three separate groups. Right, keep going with me. So it was first coined in 2013 by a sex-positive queer space in Toronto, I believe.
It's that new?
In Toronto. They're the first people to use it. So says the New York Times, like they did a bunch of research and that's what they found, was they were the first people to use it in a tweet. Right. So then from there, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, we've started to see a resurgence and almost like an emergence, I think might even be a better way to describe it, of the use of this term. Now, it was originally brought to the table for the exact reason that I said, right? Because people believed that the experiences of Black people and Indigenous people were different than other POCs, and we needed to acknowledge specifically those differences. Right? So in theory, like we'd like to think like that, that's a good thing. And like the major purpose, I think most sociologists agree, was to basically give voice to the voiceless. A lot of them specifically reference dark-skinned Black people. They wanted to give, like, this term is supposed to highlight dark-skinned Black people, which I'm not exactly sure how this specifically calls them out, But through all the research I've done, that seems to be the general consensus, that they were like the major group of marginalized, that they felt like were not getting their shine.
Okay.
A lot of people think, unfortunately, a lot of people hear BIPOC and are convinced that it is bisexual people of color.
Oh Lord, wait, what? Really? That's a whole different.
The most common misconception that I've read through the research is that BIPOC stands for bisexual people of color.
I feel so bad for people of color who are bisexual and who are now being also like weirdly brought under this umbrella when like it's not even that it wasn't even about them, but it is just a question of like, wait, what?
It almost wasn't, right? Like this was not your, yeah. Or biopic, which people think they're talking about biographical pictures.
Oh Lord Jesus.
So we'll just take that second.
It's fine.
We'll just let that sink in.
Oh.
And the whole term is supposed to acknowledge, that the indigenous experience is often left out, unless we're having conversations about sports mascots, because, we saw that the Washington football team, formerly the Washington Redskins, is now the Washington football team. Why you hadn't been thinking about this and coming up with a better name for previous years is beyond me. We will let that sit on the other side of the table because I don't even have time for racism in sports. You and I keep having the conversation that we're going to come back to it, and we really are just going to have to come back to it because it's too much to handle right now. But I think there's a large pocket of people, and I kind of fall into this pocket of people who are, when they talk about BIPOC, it seems a little bit odd to me, just slightly. I don't mind sharing space, right? Like I do think indigenous voices need to be amplified. I do think that their experiences are different than other people of color, and that needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
But in a movement in which, we're in a time in which Black people are asking specifically for equality and for humanity and to be seen equitably with other people, we've decided, no, we're not going to reference you specifically. We're going to put your name in this group of other people.
Like, stop. That's not what it's not even what we're asking. It's literally not what we said. I'm imagining one of those like cartoons of like, oh, I didn't get an apple. Oh, everyone gets oranges. I didn't get an apple.
I asked you for an apple.
It doesn't matter. Everyone gets oranges. I didn't ask for
an orange. And it's like, and that seems to be the conversation. I think it was Sylvia Obel on another podcast that I listened to, Okay Now Listen, which is run by Netflix. She was like, when you lump us all together, it's erasure, right? Yeah. And it's lazy. And it does not force people to do the work on the specific experiences of each one of these groups of people. And it allows you to get away with being like, it's a single story narrative. It's a monolith group of people when we're talking about this. And it's not. And so for me, and I think the reason that you and I started to have this whole conversation is because we really did sit up, and I think we said to each other on a phone call one day, and we were like, Black is not a bad word.
Yeah,
like,
literally.
And it shouldn't be seen as such. Yeah. And I feel like in people trying to be so politically correct and people trying to be so well-intentioned, it has been a hard grasp for people to understand that acknowledging that this color, this group, this culture should be referenced as exactly what it is has really been difficult for some people. And I think that's a little frustrating from where I'm sitting.
No, for sure. And I think it is just like, God, you just said something about like, yeah, being lumped together and removing individuality and like having this erasure happen. And I actually, when I spoke at a BLM protest like 3 weeks ago, that was what my entire little spiel speech was about the fact that like people are so quick to claim that like societies in the capital W West. What? I'm thinking in French because I'm just thinking in French from having been in France all of last week, but now it's proving to be like really difficult to come back. But anyway, like in this society, everyone is so quick to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, like is so diverse, blah, 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 a melting pot. Like people describe New York and Manhattan as like a melting pot.
Yep.
And that's the issue. Are we looking for total assimilation, in which case we're being erased, our individualities are being erased, and we only just fall under that one umbrella, which is like low-key the case in France, for instance. Like that's kind of how people who will advocate against like women wearing veils and hijabs in public will say, you know, that like you're not assimilating. Or are you talking about integration, in which case you recognize that like this is a space for other people to exist, and to exist in a way that like they can exist in and that they feel free to exist in. It's not asking for that much, because why is it that we all have to assimilate to like a waspy world, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant world, when like the world is not waspy? It's far from it, actually. And
very far.
I found this, you know, in the case of like this commission in the UK being set up after the BLM protests.
Right.
Boris Johnson basically, first of all, he did not make the announcement of like this commission through like, you know, the usual press conference in front of Number 10 and whatever.
Right.
He did it through an opinion piece in the Daily Telegraph, which for me is like the UK version of Trump tweeting out policies. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Own space, safe space, where like he knows he's not going to get verbally beat on for like putting what he wants. Also an opinion piece. Your prime minister, it's not an opinion. Is it legislation?
I didn't know you were allowed to do that, but okay.
Yeah. So he basically said that he wants to change the narrative on race, saying that what I think's been slightly lost in all of this is the story of success with people from BAME backgrounds performing increasingly well at school and university. I don't even necessarily mind the fact that he's bringing up the fact that kids with BAME backgrounds are doing well at school and at uni. Yeah, everybody's smart. Everybody's
I was about to say, were they supposed to be doing poorly? Were they inherently dumb because they were from BAME backgrounds?
Listen, this is a whole, do you know what I mean? We could literally take that statement and unpack it for a whole other episode.
Yeah, you're right. Finish your thought. We'll come back to it. Table it. Please continue.
So my issue is with change the narrative, because what narrative are you trying to change? The narrative that's been brought up to the surface that fully cannot be ignored now. Is it this narrative that like, as much as you put out all these initiatives of BAME, this, da-da-da-da-da, it actually doesn't go to solve any of the problems that exist within the communities that exist within the communities that exist within the BAME community? Because that's how deep it's gotten. Again, like, I, as like a mainland European mixed with like Africa, cannot fully relate to someone who's like half Jamaican and half British. Like, we have different experiences of life. We might be the same color, but like it doesn't matter because we're not the same person. And thus like you cannot just apply the same treatment to me than you would to this person and vice versa, because it's not going to necessarily work. And then again, change the narrative. Okay, so like you literally just said, which I'm now bringing back to the table, but like this question of like, oh, so does that mean that like kids from BAME backgrounds like were performing terribly until you finally like introduced, you know, ways in which like they can be on the route to performing well? Like, what was, if it was a question of funding, why didn't you do it from the first place? Why did you just give hella money so that police could like come and literally police these places where like these BAME communities exist at, rather than actually putting in the money into the resources, into the things that will make them come out of this space where like clearly like people think that like people are miserable? Like, this is madness. And it's just, there are literally so many problems with this. And the Liberal Democrats like equality spokeswoman, her name is Christine Jardine, it's a great name. She said that basically she hopes that this isn't a way for conservatives to be like, look, we're doing something, and then brush everything under the table. Because again, that's what that sounds like. Matt Hancock, that talks of, when asked how many black like ministers are within cabinet, just going, we have many, BAME. Nah, dude, we said black.
Black people.
We said black.
People.
We didn't say BAME. We said black. Why can you not answer that question? Because you don't know? Probably, because you just see a bunch of colored faces in the room and go, ah, yes, the quota. Like, are you mad? Like, it just blows my mind.
But that, when we say that this stuff, like these things and these systems have been running for a long, long time and are incredibly intentional, we are not making this up. One, because we're two friends and we spend a lot of time doing this research and talking to each other.
Well,
but
and
two,
shout out to your boyfriend for helping us out a lot with this research this week. You a real one, Wale. You a real one.
We see you.
Mm-hmm.
But no, that's a Black man doing exactly what he should be doing to better people. But I say all this to say that these systems are incredibly deeply entrenched. So you talk about in the UK and all of the commissions that we've continually had over time that specifically are looking to address these issues of Black people or BAME people being in spaces that they were previously not privy to, right? That makes me think of all about affirmative action in the US and what people think affirmative action has done or who it affects positively, because the whole idea. So affirmative action, as we know, was introduced by JFK in 1961. And it was basically supposed to create equal opportunities in employment and education and all these different things so that people were basically treated fairly when it was racial, creed, color, like all of national origin, all of that stuff. It was supposed to be an all-encompassing creation of equality. In 1967, they had to add a gender clause to include women because of the pressure on President Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson, by the women's movement. Now, you and I have previously discussed how I will say it till I'm blue in the face. Your feminism isn't intersectional. I don't want it. You can keep it. You can take it somewhere else. But with the addition of that clause that included white women, who do we really think became the majority recipients of this affirmative action?
I know.
Oh, I pick you, Mouse.
Oh, is it white women?
Ding, 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 ding. So in 2014, a study showed that 70% of non-Hispanic white women were either somewhat or completely against affirmative action. But statistically, if you look over time, the group that has most greatly benefited from affirmative action is white women.
Right.
So when you hear people argue about why they aren't for it or why they don't think that it's necessary, it's usually the reverse racism clause or reverse discrimination. They are convinced that by putting Black people and people of color and marginalized groups, because now it includes like sexuality and things, in spaces, it is going to prohibit white people from being in those spaces or getting those jobs. So if I got into insert elite institution here, I must have taken a spot from insert Bill, Becky, Bob, Joe over there. But that's not the case. Right. What affirmative action attempted to do was to fix, well, first of all, look, hold on. Reverse racism is not a thing.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, now you know. Run it back if you didn't hear it the first time. Reverse racism is not a thing. Because racism is all about power and access to power and how your power can be yielded because of your race. So if you needed to learn that, I'm glad I could tell you, feel free to further research.
Yes.
And that is the redress, that systemic redress is exactly what affirmative action was trying to do. Now, people were mad because, the 60s and 70s are when they started instituting all of those race policies. So they were called. But really, all that was trying to do was, you and I talk about how Black people specifically are systemically disenfranchised. It attempted to add some type of equality to that system to break power structures and allow for privilege to not be such a big weight in what you had access to in terms of opportunity. And
Yeah.
in reality, who benefited the most were people that already had access and privilege. And like we have said multiple times, and we can say it again, when we talk about things like white privilege, we are not saying that if you are a woman, or if you are a low-income person, or if you're a person with disability, or if you are of a different sexual orientation other than heterosexual, that you are not facing any type of discrimination, that you do not have hardship because of any of those things. But what we are saying is you are not being discriminated against solely because of the color of your skin. That is not the immediate impediment that is prohibiting you from living your life, period. And so when we are calling for things like call Black people Black, right? Acknowledge that they are an actual group and a culture. It is because we recognize that all of these other things get recognized and get redressed. And there are things that happen in systems to make it so that there is equity for them. And the same courtesy is not being paid to Black people. We are continually choosing, because we are so afraid that Black is this thing, to lump them into other things and be like, oh, we're fixing the problem.
Like, no, not at all. Like, literally, if it were, do you know what I mean? Like, I would love one day for, like, for instance, like a Black British academic to write a piece talking about like the WAME community and like what it does to society, and be like, white, Asian, minority, do you know what I mean? Like, obviously, yeah, I would love to just see, because that's what that does. Like, it literally, it's a question of like othering people, of putting people aside. And like the way that you spoke about now, like people call it reverse racism. Like, there's been a rise in Europe of like, you know, this identity movement, like where people who are white Europeans fear that they're being replaced by non-whites that are coming into either the UK or France or whatever. And that being linked also to extremist terrorist cells. But, you know, obviously the two aren't linked, because there are some good Muslims here and there, right? Apparently, according to those people who like propagate these ideas. But that's the issue, is that for me, it's not even that like the BAME community is massive, but it sounds like it's hordes of people when you're lumping in everyone like this together and then saying like, oh yeah, you know, like university attendance has gone up X% amount by BAME students. Like, people who aren't necessarily educated on what that means and what the actual societal cultural layout of their country looks like will think that like, yeah, there's a whole group of people called BAMEs that are coming to take everything from me. Like, you know what I mean? They've come to plunder my treasures and like steal my job and steal my opportunities and stuff. And it's like, dude, no, like the reasons why like you're in the socioeconomic, like a low socioeconomic class, for example, is definitely linked to why there is this huge like BAME umbrella as well. Like, the two go hand in hand. How do you keep people away from snooping into your business that may or may not be shady, other than by pitting them against each other so that they just don't, you know what I mean? It's like this, it's not even a famous cartoon, but it's a cartoon that I've seen a couple of times of like someone who's like visibly brown sitting across someone who's like white at a table, and then you've got like the politician head in the middle with the plate full of cookies, and then the person who's brown has no cookies, the person who's white has one cookie, and the politician head is going, oh, careful mate, it's gonna come and try to steal your cookie. Like, it's exactly that. And so like this idea of like, do you know what, like, it doesn't, I just hate it. Like, I really hate these like massive umbrella terms, because at the end of the day, like, if you're afraid that you're going to offend someone by like referring to them as like Hispanic when they're actually Latino, or if you're afraid of referring to them as Latino when they're actually Indigenous, or as African American when they're actually like Jamaican, you know, born and bred, literally ask, have these like, I'm not even saying I have force these conversations, right? But like, I would rather have someone ask me like, oh, you know, where are you from kind of thing, rather than just assume like, oh, this Black British girl. I'm not British. Like, it's that simple. You have mislabeled me in a way that is, if anything, it's not that it's a racist way, but it's that you saw a Black woman who lives in this country and so you went Black British. It's not the case.
No. Well, as we all know, according to the British census, I am other Black, whatever that means.
Right.
Like, Not Black African, not Black Caribbean, other Black.
Oh,
Anywho,
no.
we're not even gonna waste our time going on whatever that means. But
Yeah.
the whole purpose of this episode, right, was for us to start to have the conversation of where are we now? 2 months after you and I talked about why Black lives do matter, where are we now? And I think what you and I both realized as we have gone through every episode, and we have lived each day, honestly, in the UK, and paid attention to what's happening in both of our home countries, i.e. France and the United States, is we started to pick up on the nuances and the fear and the disillusionment that we were getting around the most basic thing, which was acknowledging what is Blackness and why is it inappropriate for you to call something exactly what it is. You and I both understand we are Black women, full stop. That's it. We are Black because we belong to Black culture. We are Black because it is the color of our skin and it is beautiful and it is melanated. And we are proud of that. Now, when you talk to me like that, then you want to dig a little deeper. Yes, I am Black and from America. I recognize that I have heritage and roots that originate pre-chattel slavery on the continent of Africa. I recognize a bunch of different things about who I am as a person. But a lot of those things tie back to the specific cultural pieces that I am Black, period. And it should not be offensive to call someone exactly what they are. And as Mel said, on a basic level, if you are confused, ask someone. Have the conversation. Do not be afraid to engage with another human being because you are afraid of what their response is. And I always say this as we have had these conversations: put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Black people have been going through their lives on a daily basis, being uncomfortable and learning how to navigate spaces that were clearly not made for them. It is the least that anyone can do to open their mouths and have the conversation. That is what this movement is about. We recognize that these are long-standing systems, and the only way to dismantle these systems is by multiple people from multiple backgrounds getting involved and saying, this is enough. Black people didn't create these systems, which means they cannot tear them down. It is your job as others, and it is our job as Black people to work together to figure out how to fix some of these systemic issues. Period. So, we leave you with that as Black women. We're gonna say the same thing. Vote for the Black woman running, period. And call her with her proper title. Continue to have these conversations. Mel keeps giving us great tidbits from where we're living in the UK and Europe. I keep reading and finding out more and more about the US and the madness that we're living in.
I'm just trying.
And I'm proud of you. But we're friends having a conversation. That's why we're here. Yes, we are postmasters and we study this stuff and we love it and we're impassioned and we want to change things. But we are providing you with perspectives so that you can go back into your own communities and continue to have these conversations. That's what
Speaking about voting, are we going to be affected by this, no male?
Ma'am, defunding the post system. We don't have time, okay? Our listeners have an hour. We can't go into the USPS defunding taking mailboxes. That's it. We ain't got it. We're going to come back to you maybe next week or in a few weeks in a recap about the U.S. Postal Service. But if you can, vote early, vote now. Barack Obama has already tweeted it. Check it out. Find everything you can. If you can, drop your vote in mail at your polling place. That is legal. We could go into this for another hour, but we're already hitting our time mark. We're not going to do that to y'all. So check back in another episode where we dissect the elections because we're going to have to. But for now, keep having these conversations. This movement hasn't died. Stay in the streets. Stay in the conversations. Keep fighting systemic justice. Keep calling yourself who you are and being proud of it. And thank you, as always, for coming to Got Melanin.
Thank you.